Monster Hunter Wilds showing up on Switch 2? Well, it's not as far-fetched as it sounds, and I've got some reasons why I think it could happen, so stick around until the end. To start, we absolutely need to begin with the two companies involved in making this happen, Nintendo and Capcom. Specifically, the relationship between the two. So let's get into it. Capcom-Nintendo relationship. Capcom has been putting games on Nintendo platforms for decades now, and the list is incredibly long. And having worked together for so long, the bond between the companies has grown to be incredibly strong. So strong, in fact, that Capcom even had a hand in how the original Nintendo Switch was designed. If you didn't know, the original Nintendo Switch was supposed to have less RAM than it currently does. Capcom, wanting to put games using the RE engine on the console, asked Nintendo to put more RAM into the Nintendo Switch. That is an incredible amount of influence to have as a third-party company. With that said, what backroom conversations were had between Nintendo and Capcom regarding Switch 2? There must have been more going on behind the scenes. While having a good working relationship can help with getting a game on a console, it's definitely not the be-all end-all. The system that's being developed for needs to be taken into account, which brings me to my next point. Switch 2 is easy to develop for. Based on the testimony of multiple developers, the Switch 2 is apparently very easy to develop for. Charles Tremblay, the VP of Technology from CD Projekt Red, said putting Cyberpunk 2077 on the Switch 2 was not a challenge. Dennis Shirk, the executive producer for Civilization 7, said the Switch 2 was easy to work with. And many other developers are saying the same thing. Another major factor when bringing a game to a console is the developer support that the console maker provides. And based on what's been said by developers, Nintendo is doing very well with helping devs bring their games to Switch 2. They're not just letting the developers figure things out on their own. Also, let's get something straight. The Switch 2 being easy to develop for does not mean porting the game is as simple as snapping their fingers. What it does mean is there are less barriers to developing games for the console, and the process will most likely be seen as a potentially worthwhile endeavor. And if Capcom sees it as something worthwhile, then there's a pretty good chance that they'll try porting Wilds. But look, this is just scratching the surface of why Wilds could end up on Switch 2. So of course, we need to talk about the elephant in the room, the Switch 2's power. Switch 2 is much more powerful than it seems. The next thing that plays a major factor in Wilds getting put on Switch 2 is the power of the system. The Switch 2 is, of course, considerably more powerful than the original Switch, which is evident when comparing Switch 1 games to their Switch 2 counterparts. The system is able to run games like Cyberpunk 2077, Star Wars Outlaws, Assassin's Creed Shadows, and Resident Evil 9 Requiem. Games that most people probably thought would be impossible to bring to the Switch 2. Also, keep in mind that the Switch 2 is at least 3 times more powerful than the original Switch when it comes to RAM allocation for games, and also has the advantage of DLSS at its disposal. And with DLSS, if the game is optimized properly, the game can be made to run well without the system struggling too much. While power is certainly a major factor in putting games on a particular system, there's more to it than that. If a company decides to make a game for a console, they need to be sure they can recoup the costs of making it. Which brings me to my next point. Capcom wants to sell more copies of Wilds. Capcom makes awesome gaming experiences, right? Absolutely, and that's what they're known for. But you know what Capcom also is, right? A business. And you know what businesses do? Try to make more money. And how does a gaming company make money? That's right, you guessed it, selling games. And one of the best ways to sell more games is to have your games on different platforms. When it comes to Nintendo though, Nintendo systems have helped Monster Hunter games sell incredibly well. Monster Hunter Tri sold 1.9 million units. Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate sold 2.6 million. Monster Hunter Generations, 4.3 million. Generations Ultimate sold 5.1 million. And Monster Hunter Rise sold 10 million. Monster Hunter sales on Nintendo platforms have been increasing as time has progressed, and Capcom certainly sees that. I think it's a fair assumption to think that they would want to follow up on the success of Rise and Sunbreak by bringing Wilds to the Switch 2. And since we're talking about sales, let's get into how many units Monster Hunter Rise sold. More than 17.5 million units, and of course 10 million came from the Switch version. Now, where did that other 7.5 million come from? It came from the game being ported to other systems. Originally, Rise was exclusively on the Switch, but then 10 months later it was put on Steam. And then after that, almost 2 years after Rise was launched, it went to PlayStation and Xbox. Capcom obviously felt that giving the game a new lease on life by putting it on other consoles was the right move. And it obviously paid off. If it worked for Rise, there's a pretty good chance it could be a fruitful venture when it comes to Wilds. I honestly don't see Capcom leaving money on the table by not porting it. And while money is a factor in whether a company sees it as worthwhile to port a game to another platform, there's so much more that goes into the process. And Capcom would have to do a few things to make a Switch 2 version of Monster Hunter Wilds doable. Let me get into what I mean. What would need to happen for it to work? There are, of course, so many factors and nuances that go into bringing a game to a console. Licensing, hours of work, and so much more. But there's one glaring factor that I think needs to be dialed in before Monster Hunter Wilds can be brought to the Switch 2: optimization. At the time of recording this video, Title Update 4 for Monster Hunter Wilds has yet to be released. With it is supposed to be an optimization update to make the game run better than at launch and even its current state. When it comes to the major gaming consoles, the game runs well enough. While resolution and some textures may take a hit, frame rates are stable for the most part. PC's a different story, but I'll get into that a little bit later on. When it comes to Wilds running on the different consoles, the PS5 Pro, PS5, and the Xbox Series X run the game well. While the Series S can certainly run the game, it lags behind the others. But what does that mean for Switch 2? Well, since it's also a gaming console, I feel like it stands a fairly good chance of running the game similarly to some of the consoles I just listed. Here's what I mean. While the Switch 2 might not have the raw power of the other gaming consoles, it definitely has a much more up-to-date architecture compared to those consoles, meaning it has a few tricks up its sleeve to make games run better than one would think. Like I mentioned before, DLSS can do a lot of heavy lifting for the Switch 2 to offset the potential performance issues that could be caused by trying to make the game run at full throttle. And if Capcom decides to fully utilize the Switch 2's upscaling features with DLSS, they can most likely optimize Wilds to perform well without having to compromise too much when it comes to resolution and graphical fidelity. I also want to do a quick comparison between Series S and Switch 2. And no, it's not for some stupid console war reason. This is just a loose comparison of how Wilds could potentially run on Switch 2. When Switch 2 is compared to the Series S, for the most part, games are comparable. There are still some definite differences like texture quality, pop-in, and sometimes even the frame rate, where the Series S will win out. But when we look at games like Street Fighter 6, Split Fiction, or even Star Wars Outlaws, the performance is not a one-to-one, but still very comparable. And since Wilds can run on the Series S, there's a good chance Switch 2 could run the game at a similar performance level, if not slightly better. And please keep in mind, just because something can run on the Series S does not mean it can run the exact same way on the Switch 2. Oh, and yeah, for the people who are gonna say stuff like, no way it can run on Switch 2 if it can't even run well on high-end PCs, that is a very apple to dragon fruit kind of comparison. Based on what I've learned from people who know a lot more about game development and computers than I do, optimizing games for PCs is much harder to do than it is for dedicated gaming consoles. Reason being, there are a multitude of different PC builds a developer has to factor in when doing optimization. As for a gaming console, if a game is optimized for PS5, for example, it's now optimized for all PS5s. So yeah, the game not running well on PC has very little or even nothing to do with whether Wilds can run on Switch 2. Either way, it all comes down to optimization for the respective systems. So if Capcom is somehow able to optimize Wilds properly for Switch 2, there should be very few issues, if any. Beyond the issue of proper optimization, does Capcom even have plans to bring Wilds to other platforms? Let's get into it. Rumor time! I also wanted to include something completely speculative about whether or not Monster Hunter Wilds could make it to Switch 2. There's an article from Nintendo Everything which includes a quote from Capcom's president, Haruhiro Tsujimoto. He was talking about Monster Hunter Wilds and essentially states that bringing the game to other platforms would be advantageous for boosting sales. He also mentioned that the Nintendo Switch 2 has been performing better than they had expected. The full quote is on screen, and the link to the article is in the description. If the president of Capcom is making mention of selling Wilds on more platforms while simultaneously talking about the price and sales performance of the Switch 2, I feel that bodes well for the chances of the system getting Monster Hunter Wilds ported to it. Is it a guarantee? No. But if the company is thinking about bringing it to other platforms, and it's already on PC, PS5, PS5 Pro, and the Xbox Series consoles, there aren't too many other platforms the game could come to. But again, just speculation on my part. And hey, if you've got a different opinion on why the game could come to Switch 2, or even why it couldn't, let me know in the comments. I'm DJ Raviesta. That's gonna be it for me. The Rhinos are watching. Good night.